An arrogant ex-Marine kicks a single mother's groceries across the pavement, terrorizing her son. He thinks no one will stop him. But a silent man in black, Steven Seagal, steps from the shadows to teach a lesson. The sun over Redwood Valley was a merciless, white-hot disk, baking the asphalt of the sprawling grocery store parking lot until it shimmered. The air tasted of dust and exhaust. It was in this oppressive heat that Elena, a single mother, pushed a wobbly-wheeled shopping cart toward her aging sedan. Her 12-hour shift at a local diner had just ended, leaving her in a stained gray uniform, her face etched with a profound weariness. Beside her, her 8-year-old son, Leo, clutched a box of sugary cereal to his chest as if it were a holy relic, his small face already flushed from the heat. They didn't notice the man watching them. He stood by a large, dented pickup truck, a Marine Corps bumper sticker peeling at its edges. His name was Vince Rawlins. Whatever discipline the military had tried to instill in him had long ago curdled into pure aggression. He was thick-chested, his arms bare and heavily tattooed, a pair of dog tags resting against his sternum. His face was a mask of simmering resentment, a man perpetually at war with the quiet world around him. As Elena maneuvered the cart past his truck, one of the front wheels caught a crack in the pavement, causing the cart to lurch sideways. The metal basket scraped against the truck's rear bumper with a loud, jarring screech. It was a minor incident, a sound lost in the vast, indifferent heat of the parking lot. But for Vince Rawlins, it was the spark he had been waiting for. He pushed himself off the truck, his shadow falling over Elena and her son like a net. "Hey," he growled, his voice low and already filled with menace. "Watch where you're going." Elena stopped immediately, her heart giving a nervous flutter. She looked up at the wall of muscle and anger before her. "I am so sorry," she said, her voice genuine, her only desire to de-escalate and get her tired son home. The wheel stuck. It was an accident. Vince took a step closer, invading her space. "That's what people like you always say." "An accident," he sneered, his eyes flicking down to Leo, who shrank behind his mother's legs. "Teaching your kid to be a careless little punk, too." Elena's posture stiffened, a flicker of defiance cutting through her exhaustion. She placed a protective hand on Leo's shoulder. "Sir, we're not looking for any trouble." "You found it," Vince replied, his lips twisting into a cruel smirk. Before she could react, he lashed out with his heavy work boot. It wasn't aimed at her, but at the flimsy plastic grocery bag hanging from the cart's handle. The impact was explosive. The bag burst, its contents scattering across the hot asphalt. A carton of eggs shattered, their yolks spreading like molten suns. A gallon of milk burst open, a river of white pouring across the blacktop. Apples rolled under nearby cars while a can of soup skittered away with a metallic clang. Leo let out a small, terrified gasp. Elena stood frozen, a silent, human shield between her son and the man who had just destroyed their meager groceries. A few bystanders paused, their faces a mixture of shock and a practiced reluctance to get involved. One man, however, standing by his car several rows away, slowly raised his phone, the small red light of the camera blinking to life. "You think I care about your damn eggs?" Vince growled, pointing at the mess. He then pointed a thick finger at Elena's face. "Maybe next time you'll learn some respect for other people's property." Her property, a dozen eggs and a gallon of milk, lay ruined at his feet. His property, a metal bumper, was untouched. The injustice was staggering. "You had no right," Elena said, her voice not rising, but carrying a sudden, steely weight that surprised even herself. Vince laughed, a bitter, barking sound. "Right? I fought for this country, lady. I earned the right not to have my truck scraped up by some welfare mom who can't control her own kid." He took another menacing step toward her, puffing out his chest. "What are you gonna do about it? You and your little brat gonna cry until I go away?" But as he spoke, a subtle shift occurred in the periphery. From the cool shadows near the store's vending machines, a figure detached itself from the wall. He was tall, dressed entirely in black, a loose, kimono-style shirt tucked into dark tactical pants. Around his neck, a string of dark wooden prayer beads rested. He was older, with a short, neat salt and pepper beard framing a stern face, his long dark hair pulled back into a signature ponytail. He moved with a grace that defied his large frame, his boots making no sound on the gritty pavement. This was Steven Seagal. He had been inside, grabbing a bottle of water, and had witnessed the entire, ugly exchange. He walked forward, not quickly, but with a deliberate, unhurried pace that seemed to command the space around him. The few people still watching felt their attention shift from the bully to the silent, approaching figure. There was an aura of profound stillness about him, a centered calm that felt more dangerous than Vince's loud aggression. Vince, sensing the shift in attention, turned slightly. "The hell are you supposed to be?" he sneered. "Her bodyguard?" Seagal stopped a few feet away. He didn't look at Vince. He looked at the spilled milk, the broken eggs, and then at the small, terrified face of Leo, peeking out from behind his mother's legs. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper, yet it cut through the oppressive heat like a shard of ice. "You've said enough." Vince squinted at the man in black, his ego refusing to register the quiet authority in Seagal's voice. "You got a problem, old man." Seagal's gaze finally lifted to meet Vince's. His eyes were dark, impassive, revealing nothing. "The problem," he said, his voice still low and even, "is that you mistake cruelty for strength." Vince laughed, though it sounded forced now. "I've seen real cruelty, pal. This ain't it. Now step back before I break you in half." He took a step forward, trying to re-establish his dominance through sheer physical presence. Seagal didn't move. He simply stood, a rock in the stream of Vince's anger. "Go home," Seagal said. It wasn't a request. It was a statement of what was about to happen. "Make me," Vince spat, his pride taking over completely. He swung, a wide, telegraphed punch loaded with muscle but utterly devoid of technique. The movement was laughably slow to Seagal. He didn't duck or weave. He simply shifted his weight, his left hand rising, not to block, but to meet Vince's incoming wrist. His fingers wrapped around it with a calm, almost gentle pressure. At the same time, he stepped slightly to the side, turning his body. It was a simple, elegant movement, a textbook application of Aikido's core principle: blend with the attack, redirect the energy. Vince's forward momentum, meeting no resistance, carried him past Seagal. The gentle pressure on his wrist, combined with Seagal's body turn, became an unbreakable lock. Vince was forced to follow the motion, his body twisting awkwardly. With a final, almost imperceptible rotation of Seagal's hand, Vince was brought down to one knee, his face contorted in a mixture of pain and shocked disbelief. The crowd gasped. "Pain," Seagal said softly, his voice a calm lesson in the sudden silence, "is a teacher." He released the wrist. Vince scrambled back, shaking his hand, his eyes wide with the humiliating realization that the fight had been over before he even knew it began. He stared at Seagal, no longer with just anger, but with a sliver of primal fear. Elena whispered, more to herself than anyone, "Who are you?" But Seagal just gave her a small, reassuring nod, his attention still on the man he had just humbled without a single strike. Humiliation was a foreign concept to Vince Rawlins, and it burned hotter than the Fresno sun. He surged back to his feet, his face a mottled mask of crimson rage. The quiet whispers and raised phones of the onlookers fueled his fury. "You think that was clever?" he roared, his voice cracking. "Some cheap martial arts trick? I've been in real fights. I've seen things you've only pretended to see in your crappy movies." He didn't know who Seagal was, but the comparison felt right. Seagal simply watched him, his expression one of almost clinical detachment. "The purpose of strength," he said, his voice carrying easily across the parking lot, "is not to prove you have it." The philosophical calm only enraged Vince further. "Don't you preach to me," he bellowed, and charged again, this time with both arms outstretched, aiming to wrap Seagal in a brutish bear hug, to crush the stillness out of him with sheer force. It was like watching a bull charge at a matador. Seagal didn't retreat. He waited until the last possible second, then pivoted on the ball of his right foot. As Vince lunged past, Seagal's right hand swept low, catching Vince's wrist again, while his left hand guided Vince's shoulder. He didn't stop the charge, he accelerated it, spinning with the man's momentum. It was a fluid, circular motion, a textbook projection throw, Irimage. Vince, propelled by his own rage and Seagal's expert redirection, flew forward and hit the pavement hard, his shoulder taking the brunt of the impact. The slap of his body against the asphalt echoed like a gunshot. Phones captured every frame. Maria flinched. Leo's eyes were wide with a kind of spellbound awe. Vince groaned, trying to push himself up, but his arm trembled, his pride leaking out of him in ragged, shallow breaths. Seagal approached slowly, his black boots silent on the pavement. He knelt beside the fallen man, not to intimidate, but to observe. "You need to stop," he said, his voice holding no triumph, only a quiet finality. "I'm not done," Vince hissed through gritted teeth. Seagal stood up slowly. "That," he said, looking down at the man who refused to learn, "is the problem." Vince's final, pathetic attempt to rise was cut short by the approaching wail of sirens. Someone in the crowd had made the call. A patrol car from the Redwood Valley Police Department rolled into the lot, its flashing lights painting the scene in stark strobes of red and blue. Two officers stepped out. One, a younger man, scanned the scene with wary eyes. The other, a more seasoned, older sergeant, took in the situation with a quick, practiced assessment: the spilled groceries, the terrified mother and child, the bruised and defeated man on the ground, and the calm, imposing figure standing over him. "What happened here?" the sergeant asked, his voice neutral. A chorus of voices erupted from the bystanders. "He attacked her," one person shouted, pointing at Vince. "Kicked her food all over." "That other guy just offended them," another added, "I got it all on video." The sergeant held up a hand for silence, then approached Vince, who was now being helped to his feet by the younger officer. "He assaulted me," Vince grumbled, pointing a shaky finger at Seagal. "You all saw it." Elena, finding her voice, stepped forward, Leo still clutching her uniform. "That's a lie. He threatened my son. He destroyed our food." "This man," she said, her gaze shifting to Seagal with gratitude, "he stopped him." The sergeant looked at Seagal. "Sir, we'll need your statement." "Of course," Seagal replied calmly. He then turned to the other officer, who was trying to get Vince's side of the story. "You should know, your suspect has a history. Ex-Marine. 2 tours. Likely suffering from something he refuses to get help for. His aggression isn't random. It's a symptom." The sergeant raised an eyebrow, impressed by the accurate, dispassionate assessment. As they cuffed a still protesting Vince Rawlins, he turned back to Seagal. "You want to press charges for the assault on you?" Seagal looked over at Vince, whose face was a mixture of hate and humiliation. Then his gaze softened as he looked at Elena and Leo. "No," he said quietly. "He's already lost everything that matters today." With Vince Rawlins secured in the back of the patrol car and the officers taking final statements from witnesses, a strange calm settled over the parking lot. The crowd began to disperse, talking in hushed, excited tones. They knew they had seen something extraordinary, even if they couldn't fully process it. Elena, her body still trembling with adrenaline, approached Seagal. She held a new bag of groceries, a quiet offering from the store manager who had witnessed the entire event. I don't know what to say," she began, her voice thick with emotion. "No one has ever stood up for us like that before." "They should have," Seagal said simply, his gaze not on her, but on her son, Leo. Leo, who had been silent throughout the ordeal, finally let go of his mother's uniform. He stepped forward, clutching his precious cereal box, and looked up at the tall man in black. You didn't even hit him, the boy said, his voice a mixture of awe and confusion. Not like in the movies. You just moved. Seagal's stern expression softened almost imperceptibly. He crouched down slowly, his joints cracking softly, bringing himself to the boy's eye level. Punching is easy, Leo, he said, his voice a gentle rumble. Controlling a situation without causing unnecessary harm, that is difficult. That is strength. Leo's eyes were wide, absorbing every word. But, he was being a monster. Monsters are often just people who are in a great deal of pain, Seagal explained. He tried to give his pain to you and your mother. The goal is not to take it and hit him back with it. The goal is to stop it from spreading. He gestured to the scattered, ruined groceries on the pavement. He destroyed things to feel powerful. A true warrior protects things to find his purpose. Elena watched the exchange, tears welling in her eyes. This man, this stranger who had appeared from nowhere, wasn't just a fighter. He was a teacher. He wasn't just talking to her son about a parking lot scuffle, he was giving him a lesson for life, a framework for a different kind of masculinity, a different kind of power. Leo looked at the ruined food, then back at Seagal. He seemed to understand something profound had just been offered to him. Can you teach me how to do that? Leo asked, his voice barely a whisper, the question filled with a child's pure, unadulterated hope. How to be a fighter like you? Seagal didn't answer right away. He studied the boy's face, seeing not a desire for violence, but a yearning for safety, for control over a world that had just shown him how scary it could be. I can teach you something more important, Seagal finally replied. I can teach you how not to have to fight. He reached out and gently tapped the cereal box Leo was still holding. Your first duty is to protect what is important to you. Your mother. Your food. Your peace. You did that today by staying close to her. He then looked at Elena, who offered him a pen from her apron pocket. He took an old, crumpled receipt from his own pocket and smoothed it out on his knee. He wrote 3 words, then folded the paper carefully and handed it to Leo. If you remember anything from today, remember this. Leo unfolded the paper. Written in clean, strong letters were the words, protect, don't provoke. He read the words, then folded the paper again, tighter this time, and slid it into his pocket as if it were a talisman. Elena finally found her voice again. What made you stop it all? Why us? Seagal stood up, his gaze drifting toward the horizon where the sun was beginning to dip. I saw the way you stood in front of your son, he said, his voice distant, as if recalling a memory. Even when you were afraid. There is no greater courage. I don't like to see that kind of courage stand alone. He looked back at her. You are not weak, Elena. You are a warrior. You were one long before I showed up. As Seagal prepared to leave, a new commotion broke out near the store's entrance. A man was yelling at a teenage bagger, accusing him of scratching his car with a shopping cart. The teenager looked terrified, stammering apologies. The man grew louder, more aggressive, jabbing a finger in the boy's chest. Seagal exhaled slowly, a weary but resigned sigh. He looked at Elena and Leo. Watch, he said quietly. He walked towards the new conflict, his pace unhurried. He didn't say a word. He simply came to a stop a few feet behind the yelling man, his large frame and silent presence creating an immediate, unspoken shift in the atmosphere. The yelling man, sensing a change, trailed off mid-sentence and glanced over his shoulder. He saw Seagal, standing there, impassive, his eyes holding a look that was neither threatening nor judgmental, but simply, aware. The man looked from Seagal to the frightened teenager and back again. The anger seemed to drain out of him, replaced by a sudden, awkward self-consciousness. He grumbled something under his breath, waved a dismissive hand, and walked away. Seagal didn't say a word to the relieved teenager. He simply turned and walked back to Elena and Leo. Leo stared in amazement. You didn't do anything. I didn't have to, Seagal replied, giving the boy a small, rare smile. He then gave a final, respectful nod to Elena. Take care of each other. Without another word, he turned and walked away, melting back into the long shadows of the late afternoon as quietly as he had appeared. Maria and Luca watched him go, the crumpled receipt with its 3 powerful words safe in Luca's pocket. The sirens were gone, the bully was gone, but the lesson remained, settling over the quiet parking lot like the cool evening air. Steven Seagal's actions in that parking lot were a masterclass in the true meaning of strength. It is not the power to intimidate, but the discipline to protect. He didn't just stop a bully, he mentored a child and honored a mother's courage, leaving behind a lesson that echoed far louder than any punch. What does real strength look like to you? Is it about physical power, or the quiet courage to stand for what's right? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Show your respect for the everyday protectors among us. If this story inspired you, please like, share, and subscribe for more powerful narratives.